Begin. This is the Traffic and Safety Commission regular meeting of January 23rd, 2020. Let's start with item 1, call to order and roll call.
Commissioner Javandil.
Present.
Commissioner Jordan.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Commissioner Paulson.
Here.
And Chair Del Rosario.
Present. Okay, item 2 is public comment. This is for items that are not on the agenda. So if anyone in the public has something, a public comment to make, you can come forward now. For all public comments, I would request that you guys fill out a speaker card, speaker form. They're in the back table there. It just gets us for a better record for the minutes. And then you'll also get follow-up emails on the topic that you come to speak on. So cards are back there if you guys want to fill those out for your item. But this is for items that are not on the agenda. So if anyone wants to come up and speak, please do.
There was a couple items of correspondence that were included in the packet.
Yep. Noted. Okay, seeing no public comments, let's move on to item 3, presentation. 3-1 is the monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair. The packet that went out included November 2019 data. I did get the December data from the police department, so the slides here will have an extra month's data. Pedestrian collisions in November included 1 collision and 2 in December. There were 0 bicycle collisions for both November and December. Vehicle collisions were 15 collisions in November, 5 of which were reports of injury, and 14 in December, 4 of which were reported injuries. Moving citations issued 43 in November and 33 in December, and 2 DUI arrests were made in each of the 2 months. That concludes the report.
Questions from the commission? Nope. All right, let's move on to 3-2, which is the shared mobility data.
On this item, the report is for gig car share numbers. In November, there were 324 members, which declined slightly to 319 in December. And the number of trips reported were 1,431. Trips departing or arriving in Albany, and 1,401 in December. And again, as discussed last month, the newer month's data is a change to their reporting, which includes some overcounting with trips that both leave and end in Albany, and some reduction in the numbers based on their cleaning up of data that wasn't actual trips. That concludes the report.
Okay. Questions or comments from the commission? Okay, seeing none. On to the consent calendar. These are routine items to be considered as a whole by the commission. Any commissioner can pull one off, or a member of the public can pull an item off. There's only one item on the consent calendar, so it's the minutes from December 5th. Do we have a motion?
I have a comment.
Comments, please.
Minutes, so I'd like to pull the...
Yeah, go for it. So we'll pull it off. Item 4.1.
So in item number 5.3 on page 6, just before item 5.4 in the McCroskey-Jordan motion, it says move to recommend staff paint the driveway red south of the cement seam. And I remember us talking about painting north of the cement seam, which was the shoulder area of the 3-wide driveway.
So one's in between.
This would be easier with a whiteboard, but essentially there's a neighboring driveway that's 1 car width. The parking space we were talking about was here, and the curb we were mostly talking about is here, and then there's a 3-stall driveway. We talked about making the red go all the way to past and over the shoulder
driveway,
out of the 3-car driveway and to a seam at the bottom level of that driveway cut.
I'll double check the site photo. My recollection was it was the seam of the curb down the shoulder and into the driveway. But I'll double check to make sure we're accurate.
So, to my mind, this could be simply solved by changing it to to north of the cement seam.
I'll review it.
I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay.
I think I see the ambiguity. If there's two seams, then it's which one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I said it's the seam down at the bottom level. Okay. At least somebody's reading the minutes, right?
There you go. There you go. All right. Any other comments on the minutes? Do you have a motion?
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
All right. There you go. Ken, second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the minutes pass. Item 5, Section 5, Item 5-1 is review of the traffic calming request speed survey data. And I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is reporting out on speed survey data, that requests that were made between the spring and fall of last year, subsequent to the last reported counts. To review our traffic calming policy briefly, the policy was first developed in 2007 and last updated in 2015. It establishes request and a petition process, as well as threshold warrant criteria, including requirements for physical conditions of the block and for speed and volume criteria. The current policy has thresholds for if you're what's called the 85th percentile speed, which is essentially 85% of the vehicles are traveling at a speed below that number, and 15% are traveling above that number. If it's over 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, it's eligible for speed treatments. If it's between 28 and 30 miles per hour, if it's a 25 mile per hour roadway, which is most of the residential streets in the city, it's eligible for what's called soft treatments, which is signage and striping. And if it's less than 28, the recommendation is for no change to the roadway. The requests that we've received for this reporting period include the 700 block of Taft, the 600 block of Stanage, the 900 block of Keynes, and the 800 block of Jackson. And we did a couple of additional counts near the middle school annex, which I'll, in response to wanting to monitor the traffic patterns with the new building there. These are the locations of the counts that we're reporting on. And the survey results, all of the speeds that were collected were under the soft treatment and the 5 mile per hour over threshold. The volumes for around the middle school, we had hoped to get pre-completion data. We had been waiting through the spring for the construction to end, so we didn't have construction impacts with it, and that ended up carrying through the school year. So we don't have pre-data for these blocks, but this can be a baseline for future analysis of and potential changes. So the volumes that we did observe were 2,590 on Brighton vehicles and 575 on San Gabriel. And if there's an interest in looking more in detail at school hour times or anything like that, we have the capability to do that, having taken the survey. A couple of other elements in the report. One is that there is in the active transportation plan signage and striping project some soft treatment measures for the 800 block of Jackson, which is it's designated as a bicycle boulevard in the plan, so would get the bicycle boulevard stencils and wayfinding signage associated with that. And with that, that concludes my report.
Okay. Questions from the commission? Preston.
Does the speed measuring instrument differentiate between people cycling and motorists?
does have the ability to differentiate between classes of vehicles. I haven't looked into a lot of detail in terms of how well it detects cyclists. I think there's some more specialized cyclist counting equipment, but I think it potentially has the capability, but I haven't looked into how well it does cyclist counts.
And the reason I'm asking is because if you have 50% of the people are traveling by bike at 12 and 50% are motorists traveling at 32, then your 50th percentile speed at least can be low. Your 85th would be high, but might make some difference, at least to the 50th percentile. Not that that's the controlling. I mean, presumably 85th percentile is motorists, so. But still, it could drag that down compared to only looking at motorists. So on some of these streets where you might have a lot of people biking, that could drag the 85th percentile down. So I think it's important to differentiate. I don't know if any other commissioners have thoughts on that.
Well, I'd just say that really kind of the key question is, are those count tubes sensitive enough to pick up bikes in the first place? If they're not, they're just not part of the data. A lot of times when we do bike counts, it's manual bike counts. And for the city of Berkeley, the only bike counts that we do are by hand, basically just observations rather than being able to put tubes out. So whether they reliably pick up the bikes or not, I think depends on the equipment. So it's a good question to follow up on.
Okay. Other questions?
I'm available to help test the equipment if needed. I have a scooter, I've got a bike, rollerblades. I'm not being totally flip.
The rollerblades would be 2 vehicles.
Well, I've got 4 wheels in each foot, so yeah.
And if they're,
Yeah.
could have 8 vehicles. Yeah.
So it'd be 4 vehicles.
4 vehicles. Yes.
Is the equipment the city's equipment?
Yes.
And it's tubes?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? I had one. Did any of these locations have an 85th percentile speed above 28 miles per hour by direction, or were they all below by direction?
I only looked at one by direction that I had a inkling that it would be substantially different was on the 700 block of Taft, which is a substantial downhill.
Okay.
And that one did not bump it above even the 28 mile. It was, I think it's in the report. It changed it from, it was up to 26.4 miles per hour in the faster direction for the Taft.
Okay. But that's something you can go back and just verify, right, with the
Yes.
data that you have. And I think the rest of these, if I'm correct, don't have much of a grade. Yeah, I don't think so. Doesn't seem like it.
Tiny bit on Jackson, but everything else is pretty flat.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, if you could look at that, that'd be good. Any other questions?
I would just note that the policy doesn't actually discriminate about what kind of traffic is considered in the percentile. So when we look at modifying the policy, we might want to think about that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And also
Direction.
directionality.
Doesn't say by direction either. Yeah. That's a good point. Okay, any other questions? All right, let's open it up to the public. Go ahead and come up when you're ready. You get 3 minutes.
I push one of these?
No, go ahead and speak.
My name's Greg Jones. I live at 810 Jackson Street. I'm the one that asked for this to be done. First thing I'd like to mention is the cable was put down in front of 815 Jackson Street, really close to Washington. So you'd have to be driving pretty aggressive to take off from a dead stop to get up over 25 miles an hour in such a short distance. That's one thing I would question. The other one was, if you were coming up from Solano Avenue, you'd be letting off the gas about the middle of the block and be slowing down by the time you got to 815 Jackson. So I'm questioning the speed. Second thing is the width of the street, and when you take into consideration the amount of cars that are parked on both sides, then you add into the mix all the pedestrians, kids coming and going to school. And then you look at over 1,100 cars a day. It's just a lot. I've included copies here. I can leave a copy with you. But in October, we had a woman hit in the intersection of Washington and Jackson. I've got the date and the email from a neighbor who sent it to me. And then I think you probably remember last March, there was a fatality at Jackson Street in Solano. I really think before deciding not to do anything on this block, maybe you ought to take another look and, I don't know, maybe even bring it back out and put it in the middle of the block and see if your numbers change any. That's about all I had.
Great, thank you. Any other public comments on this item?
Hi there, I'm Albert Reinhardt, and I live at 827 Jackson Street, and just want to say that the volume of traffic is high. It has been a little reduced, it seems, this year with the change of Ocean View. A third of the students are no longer at the campus at Buchanan and Jackson Street. They're now over at the middle school. So, I mean, that will change some of the dynamics over there on Brighton Street, but we do see a lot of traffic on a daily basis and generally during the commute and school hours. And it does seem like it's a lot of people cutting over from San Pablo on the way to Buchanan Street, and it's just an easy access. So, you know, just anecdotally, I notice a fair amount of people, you know, going one direction over to Buchanan in the morning and the other direction at the end of the day coming home. So, you know, would appreciate the consideration of some traffic calming measures, just because when cars are going at those commute hours, we often have kids going back and forth or people on bicycles. So appreciate that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with public comment on this item? Okay, let's bring it back to the commission with comments. Any commissioner have comment? Preston.
Could staff comment on the location that the speed survey equipment was deployed at?
We generally request the mid-block with Public Works staff, but I can review the exact location with them.
I think that would be useful because it seems that it might have been deployed too close to the end of the block. So.
Yep. Other comments from the commission? Let's see what our action.
In general, and I can't recall, Chair, if looking at the traffic calming policy is in our work plan or not.
We'll see it later in a future item.
Okay. Because I have an interest in lowering that 85th percentile speed by a mile per hour on some scheduled basis until we get it down to basically the speed limit. I mean, the goal is that people drive the speed limit. So setting that at 30 miles per hour seems to be overly permissive in my mind. So that's something we can talk about down the line. I was also interested to see the 1,000 Masonic, as mentioned in the report, as actually being under review because it met the current traffic calming policy. And I guess when we get to our work plan, we'll see that it isn't on there, even though we sent it to the council on our work plan. And they removed it, but here we are dealing with it anyway, so.
Just to follow up on that, I guess. The report mentioned we've got a number of devices still.
Excuse me, Fareed, could you speak a little closer? I'm having a little trouble here tonight.
I was just wondering, the report mentioned we've got several locations where there's traffic calming devices still pending. So part of the reason I bring this up, Preston, is that if we lower the threshold, we'll have more qualify, which is great. Then we'll get more projects on our backlog that we still don't have funding to do. So the reason for the number being high, which I agree, 30 is high, is just to manage our resources. So if we were to lower it, I think we would have to then make sure that we put in a prioritization process so we know which ones get funded and whether it's a rolling list that as new ones come in that have a higher speed or a higher priority, they take precedence over older ones that have a lower priority, or if we're going to do a first come, first serve, regardless of how bad the newest applicants' speed problems are. So it's getting a little off topic. It's policy oriented, but I think, it's a valid point, and I just want to clarify, kind of refreshing our memory and the folks listening that we do have to manage and prioritize our resource use. Otherwise, don't want anything over 25.
Okay, other comments?
I wonder if we have a consensus that if the 700 block of Jackson survey was not done mid-block, that should be redone.
Agreed.
Yeah. And maybe check all of them for that matter.
Yeah, I'm
Be fair.
thinking if it does pan out that was at A15, which I have a little doubt that it was, given the report we've heard, that it would be useful to actually have a photograph of where the tubes are deployed included in the information that's provided in the report to the commission in the future, so we can more readily take that into consideration, because it hadn't occurred to me that would be an issue. So it'd be good to have that documented.
And the location of the tubes it can be nuanced, right, depending on the topography or the grade of the road, and you're approaching an intersection. I know we've had some items here come in the past where the vehicles seem to speed up at one end of the block than the other. So maybe there's some sort of administrative procedure or standard operating procedure that the public works team that puts the tubes out knows that, okay, or you just give them explicit direction, right? Put it here. This is the address we want it at.
I like the explicit direction piece.
I do give pretty detailed direction. They do have constraints in terms of where they place them. They're trying, aside from where we want the measure, they are trying to anchor the device to something so it doesn't walk away, and trying to find places where parked cars won't block the measurements for a long period of time. So there are other constraints they're looking at in the field when they place them.
Are parked cars a challenge? Because can't they just go underneath the vehicle and then?
If a car sits on the tube, if the
Right on
tires
top
are
of
on
the
the
tube.
tube, you're not measuring that period. So usually when I'm looking, sometimes we generally do a measurement for a week, but if there's a period of time where you see zeros in the hours of measurement, I pull that day, because I'm assuming that a car was blocking, and that's not a realistic view of that day's traffic.
Got it, okay. And I know that you guys try to secure them to electroliers or power poles, so I know that's also a challenge, given the spacing of them.
I guess I would be less interested in a photo than maybe sort of a map view with the address and showing where the line is on the street that it was surveyed.
I support that.
And that wouldn't require staff to go out and do the photo. They just need to record the address and quickly prepare a map.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other comments? I don't think there's any action required by the commission on this item. Looks like you're just providing comments. We're just providing comments to the staff. Anyone else have comments on this? No? All right, so we'll look to hear back from staff in the future. Okay, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you for letting us know.
Appreciate it. All right, on to 5-2, settlement agreement to resolve injunctive relief claims made under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Turn it over to staff. At least I speak for, if I could speak for myself, at least I know it's a pretty in-depth document, and I tried to get through as much as I could, but didn't quite get the time to get through all of it. So if you can give a very detailed explanation, that would be useful.
Yeah, so what I've tried to do here is put it in a way that's easily digestible so we can talk about it. But before I get into the discussion, there we go, that's better. before we get into discussion, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. The next agenda item is an update on our sidewalk program, and I know that's been a long time in the coming. Part of holding off on that was making sure that the settlement got resolved without any curveballs that would change our program. So I held off on that. Also, I wanted to introduce a new staff member. We have Emil Morales. He's just started his third week with the city, and he's going to be, his prime responsibility is going to be implementing the things we agreed to in the settlement.
Great.
Settlement. So he's coming on at a good time. He has a variety of experience. He comes from having some big firm experience, small firm experience, and even contractor experience. So it's a real well-rounded. And in the first couple of weeks, he's really been able to dig in and produce some documents that are going to help us get into compliance with the settlement. And he's an Albany resident, so that's always nice to have a local connection. And he's an associate engineer. He's taken stepping up into a role that Razu had. He was an engineer in the department, and Razu has stepped up to be our operations manager with Gail retiring this last summer. So we've had a little bit of pause in some of the sidewalk stuff, but we're now going to turn it on in full force. And we'll see how the sidewalk program integrates into the ADA settlement. There's a lot here, so one thought we could go through questions as they come. I'm happy to do that, or we can wait to the end. I think whatever works best with the commissioners. I've tried to group it in a way that's sort of logical, so we can talk about that. So I'm open to either approach. A little bit on the background. We call this a settlement, but it's actually settling two cases. The first case is a Saraswati case, which was triggered by an accident. Essentially, a person was in a wheelchair going down Solano and had an unfortunate accident that involved a deteriorated PG&E box. There's a fairly significant injuries, and that sort of grew into sort of the larger condition of Solano and sort of our business districts, Solano and San Pablo, and the barriers associated in those areas. The second case, the Galpern case, did not include a personal injury component. It was purely a person in a chair is at difficulty getting around Albany because of the conditions of the sidewalks and the barriers that they pose. So they're sort of related, but two different pieces. So the settlement that we have here is a complete settlement of the Galpern case, but only a partial settlement of the Saraswati case. There's still a pending personal injury piece that's going on, and thankfully I'm not involved in that side of it, where the injunctive relief piece is complicated enough. So I'm happy that this is done. To give you a sense of timeline, the accident in the Saraswati case occurred early 2017, I recall. And then the claim was filed in October 2017. So right as I started here, this was all unfolding. So that was quite a curveball. It's not what I anticipated.
Welcome to the job.
Right. And then the Galpern case was submitted in the summer of 2018, and coincidentally was the same sort of legal firm that submitted both cases. And then we settled in November of 2019, and we've been the last couple of months just finalizing the paperwork, and I believe the judge dismissed the case this Tuesday, so it's really hot off the presses in terms of finalizing. Through the years of discussion, there was a lot of back and forth and sort of approaches, and what I thought was very different. This was my first experience in this type of a case, and it seemed like most of the people wanted to look at it in the context of what do you say, like a shopping center, where there's these three things, go fix that, tell me when you're going to fix it. In the context of the city, it's much different because the geographic area is the entire public right-of-way of the city, and that's somewhat of a dynamic system because it's constantly changing. We have trees, we have all these different things that are impacting sidewalks. So there were many discussions. Well, just tell me when you're going to fix it. And you fix one thing and something grows out over here. So it was a really it's sort of a different sort of approach than I think people were used to. And so what we wanted to do is link a lot of the things that we're already doing to compliance. So things like the sidewalk program, things like our capital projects, show how those tie into making Albany more accessible. Because I think there are some good things going on, and we also have some issues with our sidewalks, and I think we all know where they are. So my approach was always to link it to the projects we had going on, our paving program, our sidewalk program, our complete streets projects, and then supplement it with new things. So you'll see a layered approach. And I've tried to group these into 3 buckets: things that are programmatic in nature, things that would be more of the maintenance tasks that we would be ongoing, and then the project piece where we're going to go out and fix things. So that's sort of how I've broken it down. And this might be worthwhile to go through a piece and then sort of discuss it, go through the next piece, discuss it, and so that might make some sense. So the programmatic piece, we've committed to doing a defect survey. So the idea would be we would survey the entire city for defects in the sidewalks. There would be anything from slope to offsets to width, whatever it might be. And this would be used for a number of things. It would be used for prioritizing our repairs. And I think that's something we've discussed in this commission when we're looking at the sidewalk criteria. We don't want it to be a squeaky wheels list. We want it to be something that's based on some more universal approach. So I think this is something we had already in mind through the discussions. We actually did work with a firm to do a study or a survey of the city during these discussions, and we came back with some results that there's a lot of information, but it wasn't well organized, so it's really difficult to use. So through the plaintiff's attorneys had a number of firms that they've worked with before. We're planning to work with a firm called Beneficial Design. They're out of Nevada, and this is their bread and butter. I think the firm that we used before was a firm that does sidewalk shaving and then grew the survey piece. So it wasn't their core business, and I think the firm that we're planning to use, they do ADA surveys for a whole variety of places, campuses, cities, and I think we're going to get much better data, and it'll integrate well with the GIS. Our hope is that it'll be in a point where we can put it up on a GIS system and make it available to the public so we can see where they have issues relative to their homes and so forth. And then it'll also be measured, used for measuring compliance, because we're not just going to do this once, we're going to do it on a 5-year cycle so that then we can do a comparison and see the number of defects that we've corrected over time, and that'll be used as a measure of compliance. Justin?
I like the idea of putting the map up quite a bit.
Yep.
After Strollers and Rollers did its sidewalk survey in 2010, it's one of the things I printed out for my wife because she's in a wheelchair, so she could figure out how to get around town. So I think that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, I really think so, and I think it'll help on a whole host of things. We can, it'll help us in our daily work too. It'll just be a resource, and I think people can then go see, oh wait, this is my issue. It's my issue in front of my house, and then they hopefully will go take care of it on their own. So So we'll do the initial survey. We have a deadline of the end of 2020 to complete the survey. That sounds like a lot of time, but it seems like we're only a couple of weeks in, and I'm feeling a little nervous. Not nervous, but then we'll do the survey on a 5-year basis. The reason I want to spend a lot of time before we initiate the survey to make sure that the data piece is correct and it'll integrate with our GIS system, because that was the issue we had with the prior company. And Emil is already working with them pretty closely, and we're getting a sample data piece from them, and we're going to work with our GIS folks and make sure that it's going to be usable for our needs. And we'll do that before we do the work, so there'll be no surprises.
It occurs to me that the sidewalk tax expires in 2026.
Yes.
So having a survey in 2025 is spot on.
Yeah.
And we'll hold you to that.
So that's in the works, and Emil's working with them on that. The other piece is, this is one the plaintiffs were pretty adamant about. They wanted some marking of utility boxes, and I can see that with that being the cause of one of the accidents. We had some struggles because we don't want to be managing PG&E's and AT&T's infrastructure, so we've settled on something where after we do the survey, we're going to go out and paint. We'll be able to identify defective utility boxes. We're going to paint them with high visibility paint. And then we will create a letter, demand letter, and in an ideal world, we'll have the GIS files that'll link those, send them off a demand letter, and copy the plaintiff's attorneys, and that'll take care of this requirement. But my hope is that will trigger PG&E, AT&T, and all the other providers to go in and maintain their boxes. As you can see around the city that's really a challenge. And through the couple years we've been dealing with this, we have periodic meetings with PG&E, and they're really not that responsive in correcting issues. We've held up a couple of permits, so they're more responsive, but that's really not a good way to do business. Ken?
Have you considered marking the various agencies' boxes with different colored paint, which might be a pain initially, but it could really visually reinforce who is responding?
We'll put a card and say, "Here's the contact at PG&E."
Or maybe you screen that logo on there. Yeah, I don't know.
Marking colors.
Yeah, just colors.
But that could inspire people who've had trouble with the boxes to also engage with the utility.
So we'll look at the commitment we have here is we're just going to go paint it with a high visibility paint. I hadn't thought about different colors. The one thing we didn't want to get into a point where we're going to have to go and maintain this paint over time, because we just don't need another utility system to maintain.
One question on the survey comparisons every 5 years. If you are geotagging the locations of the defects, will you be able to, in the next survey, identify which defects are new and which ones are carried over?
That's the hope, because we had a lot of conversations about like a defect could be very minor. A quarter inch still qualifies as a defect. You might find a defect that in your first survey, it might be a very low priority, but it might be stable for the next 20 years. And you might grow something that's a two-inch defect in year 2025. And you would clearly, you may never address all the very minor defects, because there's always something more high priority that wasn't on an initial survey.
Right, but if, for example, we're not able to keep up the numbers, if it's, last time we had 1,000 defects, this time we have 1,000 defects, it's like, yeah, but 2/3 of them are new, so we actually took care of 2/3 of the ones from last time. And just being able to say that of the list, how many did we take care of? And we should have numbers on what we did do.
Right. So that's an interesting point, because I imagine you get to some steady state point where the ones you're fixing them as they're growing, and you're always going to have I don't know, 1,000 defects or whatever it is. My hope is, at least for the first survey, the 2025 survey, that you'll see a pretty drastic reduction in the number of defects. And I mean, there will likely be additional defects growing, but we can hopefully sort those out.
Okay, thanks.
So once we get the programmatic stuff in place, then we're going to look at some more of the maintenance tasks. And this is stuff that we have been doing, but not as formalized. The first piece we committed to was sidewalk shaving, and this would be more of a holistic program than we've done in the past. We've done it in sort of spot locations where we've had issues. This is going to be a more comprehensive program where during the discussions, it first came up as doing shaving around the city over a 5-year cycle. So we'd break the city up into five sections, and we'd do one a year. I wanted to start that at the beginning of the fiscal year. There were some concerns of, hey, we want to show some progress right out the gate. So we committed to doing what we called a priority network, which was a blend of our priority network that's identified in the ATP, plus a couple of extra streets that were important to the plaintiffs. And I can show you the pictures here.
Can you tell me what, I think I know what sidewalk shaving is, but can you just?
Yeah, so sidewalk shaving, the intent is you really go and have an offset, and you go, sidewalk shaving is effective up to offsets up to about 2 inches. Not every 2-inch one can be done, and you're not going to hit all of them, but generally you can't do it on anything over 2 inches, and it's essentially someone going out there with a cutter and shaving off the offset.
Can you do it for any sort of sidewalk? Like, is it, you have to do it with like a new sidewalk material, or is it can be?
It can be any sidewalk. Yeah, so my hope is that this is going to knock down a lot of the smaller problems and hopefully prevent them from, a 2-inch problem or a half-inch problem growing into a 2-inch problem over the years. So over time, I think you'll really see a reduction in the number of offsets that we'll have in the city. So our commitment is to do this priority network that really models our ATP priority network with a couple of streets added. That would be Pomona between Solano and San Pablo, and Stanage between Marin and Solano for Stanage as well as Pomona. And we've committed to doing that by the end of the fiscal year. And Emil has in his first 2.5 weeks here, he already has an RFP ready to go out to get bids. So I think we're looking good on that right now. And just to be, we did do some shaving along Solano during the process here. We knew we were going to commit to something like that, so we went out and did some shaving just to understand the costs and so forth. So we've done some along Solano. So I'm hoping it's not going to, we've already done some work from when the claims were first submitted. Get back. Then the other thing that we've committed to on the maintenance side, and this would be more of a staff thing, would be to do crack sealing. And this is something where the intent here is to identify flaws in the concrete that aren't really offsets now, but they're places where water can get in and undermine the sidewalk and really cause problems down the road. So we're going to prevent problems from growing, or try to deal with them before they really become issues that we need to address. And this is going to be something we're going to do with the staff. At the staff level, we're going to do Solano and San Pablo, and the requirements to have it done by the end of 2020. I know Razu's teams has played with different products that we think will work, and so I think we have a good handle on what we're going to do. We just need to turn it on and get it done. And then once we do this sort of universal crack sealing, and again, this isn't going to be able to get every crack because as you walk out there, I can seal this piece of it, but then it grows into something larger, and then you have to, so the cracks that can be sealed, we're going to seal. Preston?
Is there a threshold?
I think it's going to be left up to the guy doing the work and what can be effective.
I'm fine with that. Just curious if it was in.
It's not
in the settlement, so.
Yeah, I think that was the struggle with some of these. It's a multi-layer approach, and no one thing covers everything. And so my hope is that through all these measures, we're really going to see but I think there's a recognition that crack sealing's not going to deal with everything, shaving's not going to deal with everything, and I don't think we have the resources to redo everything. And then this was an odd one. The traffic signal retrofit. One of the questions they wanted us to do is bring all the traffic signals up to current standards. That got really. I spoke with our folks who manage our traffic signals at Alameda County, and that can get real complicated real quickly. So we settled on we're going to do a survey and identify the push buttons that don't meet the appropriate height and make those adjustments, which I believe is a pretty straightforward fix.
Is the shape of the button also an issue? Some of the buttons are really minuscule, tiny ones.
So I think if we're going to replace it, we're going to replace it with the current version. Within the settlement, the type of button wasn't discussed, just the height.
Sorry for bringing it up.
Nope, fair enough. Fair enough. But if we're going to replace something,
Settlement's
we're going to
over, so we're safe, right? Great. Thank you for answering the question.
Sure.
What is the height or height range?
I don't. Off the top of my head, I'm not.
Staff?
And it's just 40. Is there a range, or is it really right?
You should come up to the mic if you want to
Yeah,
talk.
if you would.
Welcome to Albany.
Yeah.
So I looked into this, and I couldn't find a hard and fast rule, but according to the ADA website, it was 42 inches, and it seemed like the threshold would be an inch or two tolerance from that.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Do all of our signals have PED push buttons? Do all of our signals have PED push buttons?
I believe so.
Okay.
And we excluded the one at the two signals that we're planning to replace. Those are the Masonic and Solano and Masonic and Marin. So those aren't factored into this.
And we can do our own maintenance on the San Pablo ones, or is that?
Those aren't only city owned.
Not included, okay.
Yeah, those are Caltrans owned. So this is our first draft of the 5-year cycle. It's just roughly dividing the city up into roughly equal sections, and we'll pick one and then start cycling through. And I think on a related note, I think we're going to use that we have a similar constraint on our sewer cleaning, and so we're going to use basically the same. The same groups, sections.
Back on the map.
Sure.
Who's responsible for the path on Cardenas Creek?
That's the path for the restored area. So we have a MOU between Berkeley, UC, and Albany. So and we all have divisions of responsibility of how we handle things. I think trail maintenance is divided between City of Berkeley and us, and so we meet monthly to discuss that. So that's not specifically called out here, and actually the trail's in Berkeley, so we're.
Well, it's up between San Pablo and 10th. And
I guess it does meander, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I have to voice my pet peeve. This is an older map.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually. I understand that UC Village is not part of your purview, but this misrepresents the street grid.
I didn't quite.
This is the old pre-redevelopment street grid.
Oh, got it. Yes.
In UC Village. It just sends a message that
We don't care.
Yeah.
I think this was more of, this is the map we had as a base that we were using. So
I understand, and I'd like to push that.
we'll look at updating our mapping.
Your previous map was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is, I mean, they rebuilt it starting in the end of last century. I think it's fair to say at this point, we're 20 years into a new century. I think we can say last century now. So, yeah, so it'd be nice to have
Fair enough.
a different base map. And I know we have
Smaller
GIS
road
now, so I think it'd be possible to prepare something.
Instead of the curves
Yeah.
that are in there now. It's
Got it.
pet peeve, sorry.
No, that's quite all right. And then we get into the project side of things. This is where the sidewalk repair. So this is where we really leverage the parcel tax for the sidewalk program. That was, I think, a real help in settling this. I know when we had a presentation with the judge and I went through everything, I think the judge was impressed with, hey, we actually had a plan and we had things in place, so and we're owning up to it, and we just need now to go do it. And so I think that really helped move things along. But the sidewalks, obviously, you're looking at changes in elevation, offsets, cross slopes, width. There's a lot of discussion of prioritization, and we're going to keep the prioritization that we first used in our first couple rounds that was approved by the Traffic and Safety Commission. I think as we get more survey information, we might want to change that. I know there was a lot of discussion around adding a criteria around difference between running slope of the street versus the sidewalk, because that'll show where you'll have slope issues that may not necessarily have an offset associated with it that poses issues for folks in wheelchairs. So I think as we get more information, we would want to enter into sort of a discussion of how we want to tweak our criteria. And then we wanted to add to the priority network 2 blocks. This was Stanage and Pomona between Solano and Marin. And I think those were, the idea there was trying to make connections between Marin and Solano at intervals. And if you looked at our criteria or our priority network, there was already a lot of them. So this is filling in the gaps of that. So. And sort of the timeline to show accessibility in sidewalks, we have Solano and San Pablo, and that's a 10-year timeline. And there's a slide that sort of lays out the logic of how we got to these timelines. Marin and Stanage would be 4 years, and then Pomona would be 2 years. And I think of Pomona as a street where one of the plaintiffs travels on pretty regularly, so that was a high priority of theirs.
That's Pomona and Stanage between Marin.
Yes.
So when you
It's not the entire
the
length.
whole thing.
No, just
okay,
2 blocks,
okay,
2 city blocks. Yes.
yeah, I think the plaintiff lives at Marin and Pomona. At least that's what I found when I looked online. Because I was sort of curious why Pomona.
Yeah. Fair enough. And then for the curb ramp projects, and this was a lot of the discussion because you can't just say go out and fix things because in some ways fixing the sidewalks is different than fixing the curb ramps because the curb ramps really have to be done when you're doing paving because one of the big issues is the sort of the conform of the curb ramp back into the crown of the road, and you really need to regrade the road to get the slopes correct. So we really leverage where we were with the paving program and the projects we had in place. So we have the lower Solano from Masonic to Madison to Masonic, and it seems like an odd limit, but this ties into the first Saraswati case where the geographic limits were the business district along Solano, and if Madison is really the end of that. Through this process, we were able to, there was some CDBG money available, so we went and got, I think it's around $600,000 that of CDBG money allocated to upgrade curb ramps between those limits, and we're actively working it. We've had a surveyor out surveying, and so we're working with those designs and want to bring that to you here shortly. We have a 2-year time horizon because we have a 2-year requirement to spend the money, so that was a pretty easy one to connect to. Upper Solano, in my mind, this is tied to the Solano Avenue Complete Streets project. In my mind, I wanted to push it off as long as we could, but because we have a lot of work in the short run. But again, my thought, there's some logic to this where we've approved, we have the concept plan. My sense is that's going to take a couple of years to develop support to and turn into real projects, or it may not. But either way, the pavement needs to be done, addressed on Solano, and that has to be done in the next couple of years. So we're either going to do it as part of the Solano Avenue project, or we're going to have to do it as part of paving projects, because once you do the paving, you're triggering the alteration, which triggers a requirement to do curb ramps. So that's something I think for the commission to think about over the next couple of years, because that'll be a significant trigger point in my mind. And then San Pablo, Portland to Brighton, this coincides with our Complete Streets projects. We have about 2.5 years to complete that project. Then Marin Avenue, this is Masonic to Tulare. This is tied to a paving project that we have on our books. We called it a 2-year project, so I called it a 4-year project for the context of this agreement. And and then the rest of the city is really a sort of a 25-year basis, and that was me just taking a step back and saying, what's it going to take for us to cycle through the entire city, and a number that everyone would agree to too. So you can't push it out forever. So 100 years. 100, right? Exactly.
5 years after you intend to retire.
I hope I don't have 20 years left. I'd be.
I'm just saying, it'd be easier if it was after you retired.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's a compliment.
So that's what we have, and so I have some figures here that show the basis of it. This is a graphic I put together to show the projects we had in play and how that would link to meeting some of the meeting the accessibility issues in the areas where they were concerned. And we had projects that addressed many of their concerns, which is good, and that was able to leverage. We were able to leverage that. So this is nothing more than just graphically showing the limits of our CIP projects, with the exception of the green one, which was the new one for the CDBG money. This was something we presented to this commission back in July. This is the draft paving program. The one we glommed onto as part of this settlement is the Marin Avenue project. And as you know, we've been pushing hard to get the sewer work done in Marin, and as soon as we finish the sewer work, we're going to start the paving work. So we're looking forward on that. And then this is a figure that Emil put together that outlines the work that we need to do and ties it in with a timeline that where each thing. So this is sort of a visual representation of where we need to do work and timelines. And that, I think, is it. So I'm happy to questions, discussion.
Questions from the commission?
Could you just read through what the different colors represent on this? I can't. Maybe you could blow it up a little bit.
Yeah. So I will send this out, obviously.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we'll post it on the website. But I can't even read it here.
So are those various times?
These are the times. These are
Okay.
the times that we went through in the bullets.
Great. So it just reinforces the bullets.
It's just another way of displaying that information, and I realize it's difficult to read, but
Yeah. Go ahead, Preston.
Are there parts of the Measure P1 funding which was the property tax fund sidewalk maintenance, that will be spent to meet the settlement other than sort of the general sidewalk condition improvement?
So
I mean, like the grinding, is that going to pay for the grinding, or
so my
what's the
thought,
articulation between the two?
so my thought and my approach to this is the sidewalk tax money is for sidewalk repairs. And it doesn't do curb ramps, and it doesn't do it. So the idea, if you read the ordinance, at least my reading of it and my understanding is that you're doing complete in place repairs that don't require, that something you can hand over to the property owner and they take responsibility going forward. They already have the responsibility, but we're fixing it. So if there's a tree issue, we want to correct the underlying issue and then do the repair. So my sense is that we wouldn't want to use the sidewalk money for more maintenance type activities.
Yeah, I think there was something, and I can't remember if it was in the measure or if it was sort of a policy decision, that if there's a repair that's going, right up to a corner, you could include the curb ramp as well, since it's kind of involved in the repair, but that's sort of a fuzzy memory, so.
Yeah.
But in general.
You're right. It was in there, but the spirit was that if it's involved, fix it. But certainly the primary purpose was
Right.
the bulk of the sidewalk, not to replace a lot of curb ramps.
Yeah, so my thought is curb ramps get real complicated real quickly when you're dealing with drainage and the slope of the road and trying to make things work. So you can spend a lot of money on a curb ramp and not replace sidewalks.
So the curb ramps between Madison and Masonic, I mean, a lot of them don't have, say, truncated dome mats. But otherwise, it seems like most of them meet the slope requirement, or not so much.
I can give you a couple volumes of this group sent surveyors up and down everything and identified every flaw and everything, and yeah.
I guess it's just interesting to me because as somebody who has a wheelchair user in the family, that's not the place that I would pick in the city to start. That's seems one of the best places, but she's not in a manual chair, so. But nonetheless, I can think of what seem to be far worse places, so.
Yeah. I think we focused here, and this money came up in an opportune time because in the areas where they had that they viewed as priority, this was an area that we had a gap in terms of a project that covered it. So that funding came along in a good time.
So just a follow-up, so the plaintiff did an entire survey already?
Well, they had a group come in and do surveys and identify defects as a basis for their case. So it's not in a...
Not comprehensive to the
Well, it's not
city.
in a way that is GIS. It's binders and binders and binders. And it's not in a really usable format.
Got it. Okay. And then just one other question, since we talked about the P1 funding. So how will the funding work for this on a 25-year program? I guess you have some projects that are identified, but I assume that the city council will have to make some sort of budget allocation for this every year and kind of, I don't know.
So I think a couple things. The sidewalk shaving and the crack sealing and the survey is things that I'm hoping to build into our operating budget over the long term, and we're starting those discussions with the finance director. And so I think that would be one side of it. The other side of it is the paving program. That's going to be funded going forward. We have a variety of sources that contribute to that. And then we have discrete projects that maybe have a grant or some other funding source. I think, if you read in the settlement, there is a provision and acknowledgement that we don't have money identified for all of these, so there will be decisions that we have to make. But I think in the short run, that was the benefit of me trying to link it to projects that I knew were going, that were funded. So at least in the short run, we can we can show progress and have a reasonable level of confidence that we'll be able to deliver.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
I don't know if you actually could bring up the settlement or not, if you have it available, because there are some things in there that, I don't know. I
It's in
wanted to
the
ask
agenda packet.
specific questions about.
I have a paper copy here.
You want it on the screen? Is that what you're?
Yeah, if you could,
Oh, you can do it on-
specifically section 14, which is the work. All the way down at section 14. And then within section 14, there's 2 paragraphs regarding sidewalk repairs. To yeah. So yeah, if you go to keep going down. Okay, there you go. Great. So the first paragraph says add one block of Stanage and the 1 block of Pomona that you mentioned to the priority network. I guess that is what it is, and we've signed the settlement, and so there it is. I mean, I think I would have preferred that they were designated as a priority for repair somehow without being added to the priority network, because they don't make much sense as a part of the priority network.
So I think that might be a distinct. We could probably make that distinction
Okay,
and
that-
say that for repair, they're included, but
Right.
they're not part of the priority network, because I think we call priority network and use it for a whole host of other things.
Right, that would be great.
I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Okay. And then in the next one, if you scroll down slightly, if you can, okay, there it says, so the first paragraph talks about priority network, and then this paragraph says, parenthetically, kind of in the middle, shall be referred to herein as the priority sidewalks. So all the sidewalks referred to in this paragraph are the priority sidewalks. So one, it's kind of weird because we have priority network, we have priority sidewalks. And one of the streets that is mentioned is all sidewalks along Solano. So taken at face value, that would go from Cleveland to Tulare, which doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it looks like maybe that's not going to get pushed because
Yes.
going over that hill, certainly no manual wheelchair user is going to try to go over that hill.
We could probably make that change, I think. They had, good point.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's probably not many, I don't know that there's many street trees there anyway, so I don't know if there'd be much repair that would have to occur, but I would just,
Yeah, I'm not
again,
sure.
it doesn't seem like the first place for a wheelchair user that would provide benefit.
I think we can prioritize
Okay,
the sections between Madison and the city limits,
yeah,
which
Eastern
I think,
boundary, yeah.
I have to say, the plaintiff's attorneys were very good at this. They talked about key route, and key route everyone thinks is the large section, but there's that small section south of Solano.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And once I brought it up to them, oh yeah, they're not thinking about that piece. So I think I think all our discussions were around Madison to
Okay,
to the city limits. So
okay.
I mean, I guess we'll find out over time. But
Yeah. And then it's interesting that the first paragraph is about Stanage between Marin and Solano, and then this one is about all of Stanage. So I don't really understand. I guess all of Stanage is by 4 years.
I wanted to develop a figure.
Yeah.
I had like an hour to get it done, and so this is what we have. But my intent is actually to put together a figure to clarify some of these and say that your point about Stanage is it's not the whole thing of Stanage. It's those 2 blocks.
2 blocks or 1 block?
Or
It's the 1 block of Stanage.
And 1 block of Pomona.
1 block each.
So this paragraph, this second paragraph, even though it says Stanage Avenue, it's only referring to that 1 block in your understanding?
In my understanding,
Because I think on the map you put up, you had all of Stanage colored.
we'll make that correction.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yep, I think what we'll do is maybe a memo to file or something that clarifies some of this, because I think there is some of that. There's a lot of things changing at the last moment and different authors, and
I'm familiar with that from my work.
Other questions? I had a couple left. On the survey that the city is going to be required to do, so are we going to do the entire path of travel and look and identify anything in the path of travel that's not ADA compliant? So that's crown of the road, crosswalk ramps, ped push buttons, sidewalk, vertical deflection, slope.
so I'm not sure ped push buttons will be in it, because we're already going to go, we're all going to fix those.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we'll survey that. I think we're trying to work the scope of what we're going to include, and the idea is to pick up the whole path of travel.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
There might be some variation of that, but part of it, we want to see the data that they do for other folks. But I think for us, at least, the biggest issue was using it for offsets and really the sidewalk issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Those other issues need to get captured as well.
Okay. And then does the responsibility of the property owner or the property owner adjacent to any type of non-compliant path of travel, is that responsibility, is the city taking over that responsibility? Or?
Nothing changes on that piece.
Okay. Okay.
And that's the other piece where we are going to, there's a component of the sidewalk program that sidewalks get fixed at point of sale.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be pushing that pretty hard too.
And then P1,
Yeah.
obviously. Okay. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, thanks for the very thorough presentation.
Sure
Appreciate it.
thing.
You didn't ask for public input.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, my apologies. Do we have comments from the public on this item?
You're the public.
You are the
You're
public.
the public.
All right. You are the public.
So assuming it's back to the commission, I just want to say thank you for the investment of time and attention. It looks like you put a lot of really good thought into this and integrated it with a lot of programs, and seems to reinforce what we've been trying to do.
I think at the end of the day, I think all this is, I think I told Preston, it's not great that we got sued, but these are things that we probably should be doing anyways.
Any other comments?
Actually, I have a question. This body, I believe in 2006, passed a policy prohibiting construction of diagonal curb ramps, and yet they keep getting constructed. So that's one of the reasons and it'll come back in the work plan. I've asked for the standards to come back. Every meeting I ask for them to be on the future agenda because these diagonal ramps keep getting built. So the policy is not enough.
So in a couple of things on that. One of the issues, and you'll see this in the next project that we bring through you, we're hyper-focused on the wanting to have directional ramps, and we're working with our designers to make sure that those are incorporated, and where it's not possible, we're going to come back and explain why it's not possible. The other issue that got us into this, part of this is really controlling construction. So as part of the construction package, we're going to have a inspection sheet that is going to outline, or for each curb ramp, we're going to have a positive inspection of the forms before the pour and then the final product. And that'll be signed off on either, if it's a project that's done through our shop, it'll be the engineer of record or Robert, me, our inspector, who's going to be out on the project. If it's something that happens through an encroachment permit, we will then have either Jeff or me, or we'll sign off on that, and it'll include the ADA standard, but also the contract standard, because there's a difference where the standard's a 2% cross slope. Our standard, contract standard, is 1.5 max. So we want to make sure that the contractor is building to the contract standard, and if it's 1.75, can talk about whether you need to rip it out or not, but at least we're not going to the 2% where there's no tolerance in our construction. And then there's plenty of places where we're at 2.2, 2 point whatever, and that's technically, we had a lot of discussion about that. So I appreciate the standard issue, but I think it's more ensuring the designs are correct and then ensuring that the construction follows the design. And so we're trying to address that in our packages, but we could also talk about the standards.
Form review, great step.
Other comments from the commission?
I just want to note that I think the fact that this suit happened underscores the inequitable way that sidewalk users are treated relative to road users. So for instance, for road users, there are SWITers. So every accident gets documented, measured, data gets generated. For accidents on sidewalks due to sidewalk conditions, there's nothing. There's no data. And if there's no data, then there's no problem. And then the whole issue of the adjacent property owner.
So wait a second, Preston, you're saying that if I file a police report when I have an injury accident on the sidewalk, that doesn't go into SWITers?
I don't know. I mean, would one file a police report? You call the paramedics, you go to the hospital, but there's no police report. There's no crime.
If I get hit while I'm on the sidewalk?
If you get hit, that's different, but I'm talking about an accident. So if an accident occurs on the road because of road conditions, the police respond and a report is generated.
Right.
If an accident occurs on the sidewalk due to sidewalk conditions, there's no standard reporting that occurs, to my knowledge. I mean, I've looked into it and nobody seems to know of anything. Yeah. And so there's no date, you can't go to Tim's, for instance, which is the mapping system put together by SafeTrek at Berkeley, and you can find all the accidents, you can find diagrams of how they happened, why they happened, everything else on the road, but there's nothing for sidewalks. And so where there isn't data, there's invisibility about the problem. And I think the suit also points out that the concept, the law of making adjacent property owners responsible for sidewalk repairs just doesn't work. I mean, if it was working, then this lawsuit wouldn't exist. And if it was really the legal responsibility of the adjacent property owner, then why are we sitting here talking about it? Because we're not the adjacent property owner, we're the city. So clearly the city is not able, whatever the legal ramifications, is to absolve itself of the issue. So it's just, I mean, this is part of what motivated me to pursue Measure P1 and starting in 2009, is that it just doesn't make sense. It's just another example of inequity in terms of how sidewalk users are treated relative to road users. So, it's never great that somebody has to sue, but I appreciate the fact that this person felt they needed to do it and that they pushed the city. I'm glad that the city had a plan that it could point to and that it was making progress and taking it seriously. My ultimate goal is, if we get the sidewalks in good condition, is to have the city take the liability back, because obviously it has liability. Otherwise it wouldn't be a party to this settlement, and just treat them like the roads, like the public infrastructure they are on public land. I understand the city council wasn't willing to do that right away because there's a huge backlog of repairs, but we're going to get to a point where they're in pretty good condition. They're certainly in as good condition as the roads are, and that would be the time to say, okay, city's taking it back. Anyway, thanks.
Okay. Other comments? All right, seeing none, thank you to staff for the update. 5-3, related matter, Albany Sidewalk Program update.
Good evening. I'm Razu Angan. I'm the Facilities and Maintenance Manager for Public Works in the City of Albany. Previously, I was an engineer within Public Works, and so still working on the sidewalk program. Would have liked to have done this presentation a little while back, but with the lawsuit, we wanted to make sure we had everything lined out before we came and presented this to you all. And we're quite proud of the work we've been able to do with that parcel tax money, and that's another reason why we want to come and present it and show you the good work that we've been doing. Here's just some of the older sidewalks we have around town. And a little bit of history. I'm sure some of the commissioners are very familiar with some of the past programs that have been attempted by the city in order to repair sidewalks. Previously, there was a 50-50 homeowner-city split that had very limited funding. We would run out of funding pretty quickly and affect very limited repairs. There was a notice to repair program, but I'm not even sure how much that was implemented. That would have been a massive undertaking to survey the city and send out notices to all the affected homeowners that had adjacent sidewalks that they would be responsible to repair. Homeowner initiative, as Commissioner Jordan was pointing out, they weren't really doing a good job of capturing the need in getting all these sidewalks fixed. And unfortunately, there is a potential city liability despite the statutory language. So as a result, in 2016, there was this P1 parcel tax, and the council adopted sidewalk policy. The parcel tax will sunset after 10 years. The program runs from 2017 to 2027. It provides funding for city-led repairs, and there's also a point of sale and a point of permit requirements, so that when a home or parcel is sold or requires extensive remodeling, at those points it would trigger the need for the owner to repair that adjacent sidewalk. And in addition, we have a sidewalk maintenance program where city staff has made small patches, and also the pilot program to do some sidewalk shaving, which, as we discussed, will be vastly expanded with the in the coming years. As far as the development of the sidewalk defects list, in the past, we've relied on complaints from homeowners, residents, and interest groups, and claims against the city. There has been some staff surveys, and then the Albany Strollers and Rollers survey as well. And we're looking to the future to have contractor citywide survey on a recurring basis. Excuse me. I wanted to review the traffic and safety approved prioritization criteria. Thank you. Group A, it would be any sidewalks that have special access needs. Those get bumped up and put in a special category. Group B would be those sidewalks on the priority sidewalk network that was identified in the Active Transportation Plan, ATP. And that's further subdivided into an offset of 2 inches or greater or structural failure. And B2, which was an offset between less than 2 inches but greater than ½ inch. Group C would be an offset of greater than 2 inches or structural failure on the remainder of the sidewalks within the city. Group D would be the offset less than 2 inches and greater than ½ inch. Group E, we kept that as a special cases list. And finally, Group F would be the offset of less than 1/2 inch or minor cracking. Basically, we want to be able to track all sidewalk defects regardless of whether they meet a threshold for immediate repair or not. And then within each of these groups, we would rank the sidewalks based on the severity of the damage. Here's a couple examples of some of the sidewalks that were completed. This one here on Talbot shows kind of some of the strategies we've deployed in order to minimize future route lifting of the sidewalk. So we've expanded the sidewalk basin by curving the sidewalk out. We're still maintaining that 48 inches of sidewalk here to maintain that clear path of travel. But this approach will hopefully maintain the health of the tree and also provide a good travel there. This is another one.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
It looks like there's an offset between the new sidewalk and looks like the path to the front door?
Yes, and that was, I think in this case, was either repaired by the homeowner or the contractor came back later and shaved it down to leave that offset. We're really concerned mostly with the path of travel, and if we start trying to conform the sidewalk to these access paths to the home or the courtesy pads that we have for folks when you open your car door and step out in the planting strip, sometimes people have concrete there, and that gets pushed up quite a bit. If we try to conform to that, we'll never be able to have an accessible sidewalk.
As long as it was resolved.
Here's another one. As you can see in this one here, we vastly expanded those tree basins, curved it out, and came up with a pretty nice sidewalk there. And another one on Jackson.
Could I stop you on the last one, actually?
Yes, sir.
First, it's really great having these repairs, and thank you for overseeing and scheduling the work. The two previous repairs you showed, the sidewalk maintained width, even though it was curving, and actually in those cases, both those sidewalks are closer to 5 feet in width, if not 5 feet. This is on Jackson, and I think it's 5 feet in width too. I'm guessing it only narrows to 4 feet for ADA. But what I wanted to point out is this body discussed the issue of encroachments onto public property by private structures about a year ago. And this is an example where such an encroachment that has not been permitted is limiting what the city is able to do with its property in terms of building a sidewalk that maintains width. So if that fence had not been built on city property by that adjacent property owner, then the sidewalk in all likelihood would have maintained its full width of 5 feet. Now ADA might not require that, but this block is a critical route to school. This is within the block that is immediately adjacent to Ocean View School, so it has a tremendous amount of traffic. So I just want to point out to the commission, this is right here an example of how these encroachments are impacting our ability to build active transportation infrastructure and maintain its capacity. And so I hope it's an issue that will be brought back to the commission for us to address.
And you're right that we do try to maintain the existing sidewalk width. I would like to see 5-foot sidewalks throughout town. When we do have to narrow it to accommodate street trees, that's a compromise we have to make. We also like to have street trees. Having a wide sidewalk without any street trees is quite unpleasant to walk on as well. So it is a balancing act in a lot of cases.
And I guess I'll say,
yeah.
I support the balancing act you struck here, by all means. I mean, there's actual objective research that when there's street trees, people walk more. So you sort of be shooting yourself in the foot if you killed the tree to make the sidewalk 5 feet wide, because then fewer people use it. So, but really what I'm getting at is, we shouldn't have these encroachments on city property. So city property on this street, this block extends back, I don't know because I've got categories that I mapped it by, but it's between 1 and 3 feet back from the edge of sidewalk. So this person has put their fence on city-owned property and therefore constrain the city's use of its own property.
Moving on to some of the statistics about how many, what the work we've done. We've completed repairs in about 121 locations, or 121 locations. In those locations, there were 111 trees that either had root pruning or crown thinning or both. We spent $516,291, and that included not just the parcel tax funds. There was also some lighting and landscape district funds, as well as general funds that the city council appropriated to kind of get this program going. So we're pretty happy that we were able to spend that much money and get all these locations completed.
Question? How much revenue are we generating annually again on P1? Does anyone know?
Off the top of my head.
200,000 a year.
Slightly over 22,000 square feet of sidewalk replaced. We did that, the shaving of Solano Avenue sidewalks, and also an initial citywide sidewalk survey. As Mark mentioned, didn't turn out to be quite as useful as we would have liked it to, but it was a good first pass to kind of get a sense of the scope of the sidewalk program citywide.
Were there any trees removed outright?
Not in these first initial phases. So there were some trees that have been removed on recommendation from the arborist that had pretty poor sidewalks, and those will get prioritized in the next round of repairs.
Okay.
This is just a map showing the locations and also that priority sidewalk network from the ATP. Kind of shows that we were able to get a good geographic distribution of sidewalks. So regardless of where in the city you live, you should have noticed an improvement in your neighborhood sidewalks.
What time period does this cover?
Yeah.
Is it like 1 year or something?
This is to date, from the start of the program.
2017 then?
Yeah, from 2017 to date.
So, yeah, actually, this doesn't include, there was a pilot program that was done that sort of convinced the council to put Measure P1 on the ballot. And that was, I think, in the spring of 2016, and I believe it was 43 sites. And this doesn't include that. So you might consider adding those or not adding those. I don't know. I mean, for completeness purposes, if you want to show what the city has done for people. So for instance, at the northeast corner, well, Brighton, just to the east, on the north side, just east of Cornell, there's 2 liquid ambers that, had made a complete roller coaster there. And those got corrected in that pilot. That's a substantial route to Albany Middle School, so it was significant. So again, there's about, my memory is there's 43 other spots. So that actually brings the number of repairs the city itself has paid for up to 150 something.
Thank you. So future sidewalk plans, and this kind of is more directed at the partial tax funding and not the settlement. So we will continue to replacement program with the enforcement of the point of sale and point of permit requirements. We will refine our prioritization criteria as needed with the commission's input. We look forward to being able to spend that yearly parcel tax and again, show with a good geographic distribution and be able to show everyone throughout the city that their parcel tax is going to have an effect on the quality of the sidewalks in their neighborhood. And additionally, we will do some maintenance work, and that'll be with city staff to replace concrete sections where needed, fill cracks. We could put some asphalt wedges in some locations if there's an acute problem. We'll take that zoned approach to shaving and also fill in the cracks along Solano and San Pablo Avenues.
The enforcement of the point of sale or point of permit requirements, so is this a checklist on the permit, and then there's an inspection that happens, I guess, prior to receiving your permit?
My understanding is yes, it's part of the point of permit checklist that they have, and then the city inspector will not do a final sign-off unless the sidewalk has been brought to compliance.
Oh, so it's a final inspection.
Which makes more sense because during the course of construction, often you do affect the quality of the sidewalk.
Right. Okay.
At the point of sale, it would be more at the point of sale.
Sure.
So yeah, I'd like to chime in on that. I mean, the council was at a point of sale, and the policy concept there was it was similar to the sewer lateral point of sale repair. However, almost the entire sewer lateral is on private property. So it was a false analogy because none of the sidewalk is on private property. And I think that adding that condition is inequitable. It just makes buying into Albany that much more expensive, and it's basically asking somebody to repair the road in front of their house when they buy a house. But it's in there. I hope someday that can get rescinded.
What's an asphalt wedge?
Oh, so in a case where you have an offset that's creating an acute barrier,
Okay.
and
Like greater than
It's like a
2
filler. Yeah.
2 inches? Is it
yeah, we can go out there and put a,
triangle of?
yeah, basically it's called cold patch. It's not something that is meant to be a permanent fix. It's just a temporary thing to improve access until at which time we can be repairing the entire sidewalk. My guess is this, we would put the asphalt wedge out there in very limited cases where it was clear that, there was some issue that the city was either responsible for or had some that we were intending to repair it soon, and we didn't think the property owner could do it. Important points to remember. Property owners are still responsible for sidewalk repair and maintenance, and that's both from California law and Albany code. They can be held liable for injuries or damage to property if it's related to a sidewalk that hasn't been maintained well. And they're encouraged to perform the repairs themselves, provided they obtain the permit first. And there's multiple ways to report damage or deteriorated sidewalk. You can call or email Public Works, submit service requests through the website. And we just recently updated the website, but we will continue to do that. So that's always a good place to find information on the sidewalk program. And that's under the Public Works section. There's a sidewalk section that has this presentation and then also other information about the sidewalk program.
I just want to say I've used the website for a service request for a blocked drain, and it was nice. I got an email, and then I got an email saying it had been resolved, and I went out, and it was clear, and it was very nice to get the feedback that it just didn't end up somewhere in, my email didn't end up somewhere out in the
Wonderful. And
internet.
Millennials are always good.
And the service request is a good way for others to track that too, because if you can sign up to receive an email when other folks report service requests of certain types, so that you can follow them and watch what goes on
In your spare time.
Yeah.
There was a repair of a sidewalk that's on the west side of Stanage, north of Solano. That was long time standing damage. It was I think there was a broken water line there, so there was standing water. Do you know how that repair was paid for?
Oh, that's Stanage, north of Solano?
Yeah.
I believe that was through the parcel tax.
Okay, so, because it looked like the damage was due to some subsurface infrastructure break.
There was a lot of different issues going on there, and I don't want to get into all the details, but yeah, there was a lot of issues. I don't think we've resolved all the issues there, because I've still seen some standing water, but I feel fairly confident with that repair that we at least the sidewalk infrastructure there, which I think is a pretty important one, it being right off of Solano, will
Yeah, I mean,
be in good shape for a few years at least.
I'm really glad that it's repaired. We actually used that as the photo site for the campaign for Measure P1. we had a kid there with a scooter and had her pick up one of the had her pick up one of the chunks of concrete and hold it up, like, this is your sidewalk. So it's really great that that's been repaired.
We'll put that on the next poster, so we show the before and after.
Before and after, yeah.
So there were, I think only the first year of P1 has been spent at this time, is my understanding.
No, I think we spent all the first year and a good chunk of the second year, too.
Because I think the city council in the CIP put in $300,000 from other funding sources, and you spent $500,000, and Measure P1 generates $200,000. So that's about 1 year, if I have the math right.
Yes, so we got caught up to the FY19 budget. So we spent money that was appropriated for FY19 budget. So we're now, or most of it, now we're on the FY20. And yes, they did put money in the earlier years. We used some of that general fund money to do the surveys and other things. So it's separate from the sidewalk money. And I think that funded I think there was a first round of sidewalk program, sidewalks done that was done by Jocelyn Walker, when she was our CIP manager. She managed that project. I think that funded that piece of it too.
That was the pilot I was referring to. That was before P1 was even passed.
Okay. Well, let me look into that.
Okay.
Because I know we've been very diligent about
Sure.
that, of not diverting money away from that, but I think we have spent up through
Through this year's revenue, essentially.
for the most of the FY 2019 money.
FY 19
Yes,
slash,
that's-
yeah,
So
FY
18, 19.
18-19, right, so we're on 19-20.
Right.
So is a round of repairs funded by P1 anticipated for this summer?
So that's, once Emil gets his shaving contract out, he's going to turn his attention to that. Yes, so we want to pick up on that. My hope was that this would have been resolved 6-8 months ago, but it wasn't, so that we can continue going the way we were, had been going at a pretty good clip. Now that this is all resolved, we'll get our survey done, get some of those things done, and then turn our attention and continue continue doing the sidewalk repairs.
And my recollection is that, I guess, some more challenging sites were put off for the next round from the previous round. So places where you say the trees might have to come out or just really much more involved.
So we did put off places, and this is, I think, something we're still working out with the Pros Commission about what to do with some trees where there's a desire to keep trees, but when we engage the arborists, the repairs are going to damage the trees. So I think we still have a handful of those that we're working through. But I still think there's plenty of sidewalks that we can fix that don't require trees.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess for anybody who is watching this in posterity, PROS means Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission,
correct.
which has jurisdiction over street trees.
Yep.
In that regard, the Climate Action Committee at its last meeting established a subcommittee to look at the urban forest. And the reason for that is because, well, the temperatures in Albany have gone up 5 degrees in the last 30 years. So one of the few mitigations that's under the city's control for that is increasing tree canopy. And so that's one of, I think, 4 actions it has prioritized for immediate work on its behalf. It is going to, I believe, be reaching out to the PROS committee for members of that subcommittee. I think it would be appropriate if this commission had members on that subcommittee as well, because finding space in the infrastructure so that we can put in bigger trees, because a lot of the trees that are approved and being or have been planted are relatively small. They're not going to really make a difference to the urban heat island. I mean, essentially, we're trying to combat climate change by combating the heat island. And I don't think we're going to get at that out of the kind of street trees that we're currently planting because they're just too small. So to the extent we need larger trees, then that obviously has implications for sidewalks, for curbs, and so I think it would be appropriate for this body to have members on that committee, but that probably needs to be agendized in the future to discuss.
And that's the end of my presentation. So.
Great, thank you. All right, other questions from the commission?
Just thanks again for the work. It's really great.
Yeah.
And
Appreciate it.
like I say, I never imagined how creative it was going to be, the balance between the trees and the sidewalk, and I think you've done a really great job. That one spot you showed on Portland near Cornell was really great, how it went around those two trees, and that's right by a daycare facility, so thanks.
Thank you.
Does the member of the public have a comment? No? Any other closing comments from the commission? All right, and I think this is just for an update, information only. Thank you, staff, for the update. We go on to 5-4, citywide street lighting evaluation.
Yes, thank you. So the action in front of the council is to provide comments back to staff. This is a draft request for proposals that was in your packet for a citywide, what are we calling this? A citywide street lighting evaluation. This is a project. The evaluation is in the CIP for the city. This is a first step in developing kind of a plan of action for citywide street lighting that would be implemented as a separate CIP project as we get off the ground. So I don't have a presentation, but I can just kind of go through the basics of the request for proposals. So traffic and safety will be kept appraised of the selection and contract award process as we move forward. So there'll be a panel. We'll select a consultant based on their experience, and then we'll come back to you guys and present that. Public participation is going to be a big part of this. We're proposing that the traffic and safety public meetings to be used for that public participation. If there's issues around that, we could always obviously have standalone meetings if that seems better for the process. The first steps the consultant are going to be doing is a physical inventory of our current lighting inventory. We don't have a comprehensive one. We did this a few years back when we switched over to LEDs. So we have a starting point, but we want the consultant to go out there and actually have a good database to begin to start from. We want the consultant to evaluate our current lighting levels and then come to us with essentially this is what we have. This is the current lighting quality and quantity, so to on the ground, so to speak, from here. After that, so that'll be a technical memo. That'll be a presentation to staff and the public. And then following that will be establishment of criteria. That criteria can be by street categorization, residential, arterial collector could be one category if we think that's most appropriate. Consultant can recommend that, and then the commercial corridor would have its own criteria. So we would have essentially established, we would know where we are and where we want to get, and then we would have the consultant kind of lay out a plan for us to satisfy that criteria. And we'll ask for a 5-year time frame. We could ask for a 10-year time frame to get a sense of what kind of budgetary impact we're looking for to get the whole city into this kind of, I won't call it compliance, but a target level of lighting.
Okay. Questions? Preston?
Is San Pablo included, or is envisioned as being included in this project, since I don't think the city has control over lighting on San Pablo?
I think it's useful to at least know what lighting, the current lighting level that's on San Pablo. If we see a deficiency there, we can certainly communicate that to Caltrans. Caltrans probably already has a lighting standard for San Pablo, so we can simply communicate that deficiency back to them.
Okay.
Is this a matter of inventory? Was it also a matter of measuring light levels?
Yes, measuring light level, a photometric survey is also included.
Will the inventory or the setting, it sounds like you said they're going to set some criteria that are based on standards, but will it set guidelines and standards unique for the city of Albany, and that we then have a standard or a guideline that we're going to place in our plans?
In terms of lighting level or quality, we're going to leave it up to the consultant to propose a plan of action, kind of an approach to work.
Mm-hmm.
They could either rely on a standard, like a national standard. I think I referenced a couple standards in the proposal. If they think, based on our feedback, if we want them to go in a different direction, we could certainly give that direction. I wasn't imagining starting at a different standard. I want them to be able to come to us with their professional guidance.
Right.
And give us a specific recommendation.
But it seems like that would then establish standards that the city can adopt and use going forward. Correct?
Yeah, correct. If we think that's appropriate based on the results of the evaluation, we can certainly come back to this body and to council with a city standard, not just for the lighting levels, but also if we see a specific luminaire that we like, a street light that's functional for us, that works for us, we can obviously adopt those standards through this as well.
Okay. What about pedestrian scale lighting? And that will be measured differently or looked at differently for Solano, I think, is the only, or San Pablo, I guess, also?
So I think that'll be part of the evaluation process. We can tease that out in the questions. If they propose their photometric survey to include pedestrian or sidewalk lighting for Solano, for Marin, for other areas of the city.
Okay, great, thanks. Other questions? Yeah.
I have some input. Not questions,
let's see if there's a
that's
public
fine.
comment on this one.
As well.
If you can come up to the mic, that would be great. Thank you.
Kathy Madison I live in Albany. Is this going to include residential, like all of the little tiny residential streets, or just the main arteries? You use the word residential street.
Yeah, we plan for this to be a full evaluation of all of the streets in Albany.
And will it be done at nighttime? I mean, like where you can actually see how dark it is on streets?
That's a fair question.
Like just, I mean, if you walk down my Cornell Avenue at night, you can't see a thing. You need a flashlight.
I have walked down Cornell Avenue at night.
I'm wondering, when you say light level, how are you going to test this? Are you going to just see what the light bulb is and see how it goes down, or what?
So part of this is we're inviting design professionals to come in and propose their approach to work. So part of it is asking those tough questions to them as well. So I think the idea that I have in my head is that we'll actually schedule different parts of the year to go out at 7 p.m., to go out at 9 p.m., and get different lighting levels that people experience, whether they're going to school in the evenings or coming home from school, commuters. If you're out on an evening walk, that's a different experience in the fall versus the summer. So those different things, we want those captured as best we can in the evaluation.
And will it only evaluate like really tall streetlights? Or I know one of the ideas to make streets more pedestrian friendly is to bring the lighting down to a more pedestrian level. Is it going to take different types of lights into?
So that's part of the consultant bringing back specific criteria that they've seen. So national standards are changing. So national standards do have different lighting levels for pedestrian streets that are more pedestrian friendly. So we want the design consultant to come back with specific street lighting criteria for larger commuter streets like arterials, like Solano and Marin, and then also for clearly local streets, low volume, but have a high pedestrian, the ratio of pedestrians is much higher, and have those more pedestrian-friendly lighting. And they would come to us with proposals for different lighting levels for the city. So some of those might be shorter, yes.
Okay. Well, I know that when they talk about adding housing to the El Cerrito BART station, there's a lot of plans there. They say that a lot of people walk and bike to the station, and that's a rationale for getting rid of parking. But then you have these little streets with people walking down that can't see or be seen by traffic. So that would be, I would think, part of the mix. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the commissioner comments. Ken.
So when I hear you speaking, you're talking about pedestrian automobile interaction. I really don't see that reflected in this RFP. And it's my understanding that, there are places like the Cardenis's Path, the path on Buchanan, that are probably separate enough that they need to be addressed separately. And then in terms of streetscape, the sidewalks, obviously, that's the kind of thing I understand. It sounds like you might be wanting to tease that out later, but I think we need to be more explicit in terms of interaction and experience for both vehicles and active transportation in terms of walking, using sidewalks, whatever. And there's also a whole realm of intersections, which I think should be called out specifically. And beyond that, even, having a level of light in an intersection is great, but we've discovered through what we've seen over the years that it's about where the light is in the intersection and the contrast for oncoming vehicles and pedestrians to be seen or see. And I guess I don't see that addressed here. At the very least, I'd love to see explicitly language about all modes of travel and all pathways in Albany.
Yeah, we can do that. We can add that language in there. So to respond to one of your comments regarding the light placement or the light throw of the light, that's more of a design element. So we're gonna evaluate the delivery at the end of this process is a planning level of cost and criteria that we could work with and plan the next steps in the CIP.
So where does the data gathering happen in the process? Is that after the needs have been sort of teased out so that you can actually get data to respond to those needs? Or is the data sort of gathered before that process?
So the data gathering in terms of what's on the ground now?
Yes.
Yeah, that can be early in the process.
I would suggest to you that that might not be the best place for it. For example, if you're talking about intersection visibility, or if you're talking about off-street paths, and other things may come up as well.
And that may influence how we collect our data?
Well, yeah, for example, it's one thing to stand or position a sensor in the middle of an intersection and take a light level. It's another thing entirely to figure out how the light hits the pedestrians in a crosswalk to be seen by oncoming traffic or traffic turning right. Maybe you need some different measurements there.
So maybe one of the key questions at the selection phase is how they would propose to design a photometric study to accommodate both pedestrian and vehicular traffic.
Yeah, and I'm suggesting that you put that in your RFP so they can respond to that constructively.
Yeah, we can do that. We can certainly do that.
If I may, it seems like some of the items that you brought up, Ken, if this is going to be developed into a plan, that maybe we start with a problem statement with the existing conditions and then goals and objectives, so then we have an idea or direction that we want to go in before we jump right into the data collection and specific analysis.
Yes.
Other comments?
Yes, I definitely support both those points. And I think to underscore what I think I understood Commissioner McCroskey to be saying is if you measure the light level at the intersection, it might be that having a light beyond the intersection, there's some research saying it's not the light at the intersection that matters for the safety of sidewalk users crossing the intersection. It's what the light is a little bit down the street so that there's some contrast. They actually appear as a shadow, as opposed to if they're lit, they might have the same color as the street itself, even though they're all lit. So there's a lot of research around that. So just measuring light levels at the intersection might not give you the answer. And so I would say, whether you call it a design issue, a light level issue, a lighting, whatever, it's an issue that should be addressed by this process.
I would go further than that, too. I would say that actually I wouldn't spend any money on lighting the interior of intersections, or very little.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just enough that the pedestrian can see the ground.
Well, the crosswalks, yes,
Yeah.
but the center point,
Right.
pretty much no.
Yeah.
Although there are some cases. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure. And I would support the idea of a problem statement. I mean, what I had in my notes was that there should be, I think, more context setting in this. Albany is potentially unique, relevant to the settings in which responding consultancies might respond. So, for instance, Albany is tied for second of all Bay Area cities in transit use. Second.
Wow.
So if they haven't worked in the city that's first, then they haven't worked in a city that's like Albany. And being second in the entire Bay Area for transit use means there's a lot more people walking here than they're going to be used to. Half of workers do not use a car for commuting, not in a carpool, not anything. Again, going to be pretty unusual context for them to be working in. So I think all this context needs to be provided. You can pull these numbers from a site called Vital Signs, which is run by MTC. So I suggest you pull numbers from there, point them to that. Also in the notes, yes, target lighting for crosswalks, safety. I didn't see what you said in response to a point or a question that meetings of this body would be used for elicitation of comments and input from the public. I don't see that listed in the RFP. And so I think the consultant needs to be notified. That's part of what we want them to have in their budget, is some budget for staff members to actually attend these meetings. I think, as you can see tonight with where the traffic counters were, there's good input that can come from the public. I think I'm not looking at the proposal right now, but I think there were 4 evaluation criterion, and what I have in my notes is it looked like the first and the second were the same, essentially, just kind of phrased differently. So I would suggest collapsing it to 3 and having personnel weighted at 50%, approach at 35%, and other considerations at 15%.
Could you repeat those?
Sure, yeah. 50% for personnel, so that's experience of the team. 35% for approach that they propose to use, given the context of Albany, and then 15% for other considerations, which, they might bring something creative to the table.
Okay.
I would say it's listing the miles. So I think the number of road miles is listed. It's pretty straightforward, but I'd list the miles, the sidewalk miles as well, since that's pretty important. It's pretty much double, because we have sidewalks everywhere on both sides for the most part. Yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
A follow-up question on Preston's comments. What did staff envision the roles and responsibilities to be? Because I think are there multiple commissions that would chime in on this, or are we the primary?
You guys are the primary.
Okay.
If you guys see the value in another commission jumping in, I did put, I noted, I think, 4 public workshops in the RFP without specifying whether it was traffic or safety or something else.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Honestly, I put those in there, and then later on we thought this might be the right forum for the work.
Yeah, and I don't have a strong opinion on that. I just thought I didn't see it in there, so I apologize.
No problem.
I don't think a number is easy to find. I'm looking under task 1, and I don't see numbers of public meetings.
I'll put them in there. I think I put them under tasks 3 and 4, but that's fine.
Okay.
If they're not in there, then that's my mistake.
So comment not necessarily on the RFP, but just moving forward, if we could also think about lighting around biological resources, so creek corridors or other biological areas of concern within the city, just something that we make sure it doesn't get lost in the process. Because you would want.
In terms of not overlighting.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of hinted
I
at
don't even
it.
know if we have that much open creek, the creeks that aren't culverted that would be lit, but just to think about, not for the RFP necessarily, but moving forward.
Right. No, as we move forward, like along Cardenis's Creek, I mean, you might want to light that, but you don't want to influence the creek itself, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it could be relevant. I mean, so Cornelis Creek, even within the grid street area, is daylighted, not culverted. So you might not want to put a street light right where the creek is. I mean, might not do that anyway, but you don't want to, have light going right down into the creek. So I think it is relevant even on the streets as a potential concern.
Okay.
Yeah. How's cost considered in the RFP process? Is that a separate envelope or?
We'll do a separate envelope for the cost proposal. We want to evaluate against experience.
Okay.
Could you explain the separate envelope technique?
The way that we have it, at least where I work, is RFQs are based upon qualifications and approach, and then there's a separate envelope you select based upon that, and then you negotiate the price. And there's some processes where the price is incorporated as a percentage of the score. So here it looks like this is separate.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my intent.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. My one comment that wasn't covered is using the shelter to power other things. So that is a very useful tool that other cities use. I don't know if the city would ever put in, electronic kiosks or anything like that. But bus shelters has always been one where I think Berkeley, we tie into the streetlight grid, or Oakland also, there are ties into the streetlight grid, which makes it a lot simpler than having to trench and find power from someone's house or near commercial property and asking permission to draw power there. So any of those opportunities that could be identified would be great.
Okay.
Yes, Preston.
And then I just note, walking around looking at streetlights, now they're replaced with LED lights. The sodium vapor was replaced with LED, I think about 10 years ago. And quite a few of the ones I look at, there's a large number of diodes that are out on them. And so, in terms of current light levels, it'll be interesting to hear how the consultant is going to manage that, because you could replace those and that would obviously change the light levels that we have at very low cost compared to putting in new light standards and whatnot. So what we have now isn't necessarily what we could get for relatively low amount of money. And so I don't know if they're when they're going out and they're doing their survey, I don't know if they're actually going to survey, okay, well, what is the condition of the actual light bulb that we're measuring the light from? Because the light that we're measuring may not really be representative of what would be easily achievable at this location.
We certainly in the background section, we could note the year that that conversion took place, and that we've seen some degradation in the quantity of that light coming off of it, to prompt them to put that into their approach to work.
Great, thanks.
Other comments? All right.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to 5-5, Traffic Safety Commission Work Plan Status Update.
Thank you, Chair. So I can go through the items from the memo one by one, or just answer questions on them however you like. But essentially, what's provided here is an update from staff on status of the items that were in the commission work plan that covers the period July 2019 through June 2021, coinciding with the city council strategic plan timeframe. And it identifies the priority work plan items for the commission and includes the priority projects that were identified in the city council's strategic plan. So if you'd like me to go down the list one by one, I have, or if you want me to just bring a few on the screen and
Is there a
briefly, or
preference from the commission?
questions.
Or do you want to, or are there specific questions? Does anyone have a preference to go through the whole?
I don't particularly want to go through the whole thing. If I mean, somebody else does, then it's fine. But
I actually have a related question that I'd take this opportunity to bring up. When are we transitioning to the Transportation Commission moniker?
So the commission made that recommendation along with some other changes to the municipal code. That was presented to council and they did not adopt that. They sent it back to staff to revisit some of the appeal changes. It wasn't related to the name or the sort of composition and mission. So that didn't happen, and we still need to bring that back to City Council for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we can open it up to questions, or we can have staff go through the entire list. I don't know if anyone has a preference. I'm okay with opening up to questions unless there's...
I vote for questions.
Sounds good. Okay. Let's go for questions. Who would like to start? Go for it.
Let's see. When I think there was a mention in the work plan update about detailed design of the new signals on Masonic. Do you know when that might be completed, and is that going to include the motorist decision zone detection?
That's the first item number 1 on the first page.
I don't have a completion date of the detailed design. I believe that the Public Works Department has entered into a contract. I'd have to double check, but I believe that work is underway, but I don't know a schedule for that.
Okay. And then I guess I would put in a plug again for motorist decision zone detection. I think it was just last night I crossed Marin and Masonic, and some motorist who was in the decision zone went through the red light. So anecdotally demonstrated the utility of that engineering approach. So just for those who might not be familiar, this is putting a loop in the road in the position where a motorist is likely to be when the signal turns orange, and therefore they have to make a very fast decision on whether to stop or go. And so there are some signals that are configured with these loops so that they will not turn orange when there is a detection of a motor vehicle there. So that way all motorists are in a position where it's clear that they should go through or where it's clear that they should stop. So that would obviously add to the cost, but it's something that could be looked at in engineering. And a year ago, this body voted for 2 improvements to the Hawk signal on San Pablo at Dartmouth. And to my knowledge, I don't think either of them has been implemented. Those, again, were changing the sign, which currently says stop on red, which is really not the full correct instruction for motorists, because it doesn't say that if they stop on a flashing red, they can then go. And then the other was that, if I recall correctly, the orange phase was 6 or 7 seconds, which is about 2 times longer than the standard should be, based on what was described at that meeting. The standard being 1 second of orange time per 10 mph of speed limit. And so, unless I'm wrong, I don't think either of those have been changed, but maybe you could provide an update.
Sure. I did have some initial conversations with Caltrans staff, but I need to still work on that one. I'm figuring out what changes they can make, what changes we need to go through a encroachment permit process and fund ourselves. So I have more work on my end to figure that out.
Okay, I guess I would just encourage that to happen, because while it's perhaps bureaucratically difficult, it seems in terms of the actual work that would be done as a result of getting through that minimal. and I crossed it 2 times today, and motorists were honking at each other because some in the back knew that the ones in the front could go, but the ones in the front didn't know they could go. And so it's just not a good situation. And the data that was collected and presented to us was that something like 25% of motorists are not abiding by the signal, probably no fault of their own because they don't know what they're supposed to do.
And it might also inform other municipalities that are putting in hawk signals nearby.
Yeah, and so it'd be worth knowing that there's a hawk signal, I think, say Hillegas, on Ashby at Hillegas, and I haven't actually gone and checked that out, but do you know, is that configured substantially differently than the one that we have here? I think it has cycling detection. But
Yeah, it detects bikes separate from cars, and it's also got a very short flashing red phase. So a motorist might get confused, and 3 seconds later, the light turns green anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the point there being because it's designed to treat bikes approaching the intersection potentially at speed, who may be looking at the pedestrian countdown signal. You don't want a flashing red while bikes are looking at pedestrian countdown signal that in a normal intersection they're perceiving as, cross traffic is at a full stop. So we resolve that so those don't happen at the same time.
Oh, so I see, so it has the ratio of solid red to total red time is much greater than the one on San Pablo. Interesting. And that's relevant because there's a CIP project for Albany to change that signal to be more accommodating of people cycling. And so if and when that should happen.
Right.
Yeah, okay, interesting. How about the signage? Is the signage the same as what we have here, or does it actually, well, I guess it doesn't matter. Like, say, if you only have 3 seconds flashing red, then
Yeah.
it's kind of immaterial. All right.
Fareed, you said green, you meant
Off.
thank you.
People think of as green, but yes.
Let's not get into the debate of hawk versus signal.
Yeah, let's see what else. There's note updates to city standards as needed. I'll just reiterate again that, like I've been saying for a year, I think at least one is needed, which is to put in the standards that diagonal curb ramps are not allowed unless there's some exception filed or made by the Public Works Director.
Maybe you want to be chair, and then you could put it on the agenda.
It's, I don't know about that.
Just throw that out there.
And then the update refers to the Solano Avenue Complete Streets and Corridor Revitalization Plan. It's not named a plan, it's named a study. So I would ask that that correction be made. And that, while it seems trivial, it's actually of some import, that language change. And I think that's pretty much what I have.
All right. Any other comments from the commission?
Oh wait.
Questions?
Let's see. Oh yeah, there was also, I'm sorry, the project at Talbot and Marin, I think it'd be worth noting in this work plan update that this body recommended a bulb out on the southwest corner. And so that's not included in that, the update on that item. Thank you. I know that was sort of a lightning round of everything, so I appreciate that you might not have it all right in your head right at this moment.
That reminded me, I did, so you brought up the Dartmouth San Pablo. There were a couple items from the accomplishments list that weren't in the memo because those were accomplishments, but that one we discussed, and it's been brought up by the commission to bring back a post-project evaluation for the Washington Avenue traffic calming Pierce to Cerrito. So that I had also noted it's not on the work plan because it was accomplishment, but that was requested previously.
Other questions?
Is it your intention to sort of do this yearly?
makes sense to me, but we can discuss that.
Okay.
This time next year, we may be embarking on the next, I guess there's a year and a half left of this one, so maybe it would still make sense to do an update as we're starting to think about the next 2-year cycle work plan at that point.
Yeah. I think a year annually. That would
Yeah,
be
I think
good.
that makes a lot of
I agree.
sense.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, thanks for bringing this to us.
Other questions or comments? Public want to comment on this item?
The red curbing, I would like to request that the corner of Cornell and Brighton be a priority, because we currently have a BMW that parks right up to the corner all the time. And we really need that red curbing there. And I was exploring the website, and I see the Public Works Department does have Albany traffic calming project on it. And I just wondered if that's something that, I know we've talked to you and Jeff about this, but is that in this, or is it anywhere? I feel like it's kind of floating around in a black hole somewhere. And I'd just like to know if there's ever going to be any traffic calming in our neighborhood, and especially on Cornell, and how maybe the citizens can work with you, like the HOAs and the people in our neighborhood, to move this forward. Because the street lighting is a part of it, the curbing, but we also need more aggressive management of traffic, especially on Cornell. And it's like, this was 2016 that we were told there was funding for this project. And I understand there's been street lawsuits about the sewer and, different priorities, but can there be some sort of indication of where we fit in the next year or so? Because I know you're reviewing things, but then what's going to happen? So is there any way to know this or work with you or somehow get this done?
Okay. I wouldn't mind getting a response from staff if the commission wishes, but we also need to have a motion to extend time maybe until 9:45.
I move that we extend the meeting to 9:45.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Seeing none? All right.
And then on this item,
Yes.
I need to recuse myself.
Okay.
So I will step out very quickly, and you guys can carry on.
Well, I think one question is this, can we discuss this if is it on the agenda or is it part of the work plan?
It's
listed on item
update
3.
is in under traffic calming projects.
Is it there?
Here on the
I was looking,
slide.
it's there.
Well, she actually sort of
Yes.
brought up several things. I think we might want to tease it out a little bit if we're going to talk about it.
As long as it's related to the work plan.
Well, red curbing is on the work plan.
Okay.
Traffic calming is on the work plan.
Specifically for,
Well,
because there's a different process, right? For how you request.
the question is,
to have
what
traffic
does
calming look at.
the notation on the Public Works website represent? Are they referring to their installation of or implementation of speed humps? Is it the North Albany traffic calming? That's unclear to me.
So the work plan does, I didn't put the CIP numbers, but in my update, I included the North Albany project. I believe it called out in that work plan item, North Albany, as well as the other traffic calming projects. So I think it's appropriate. We can talk about it in that context.
So
The
I
red curb
actually
item
think
did
it's a little hard
discuss.
to respond to her because of the broad nature.
Yeah, there were.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, go for it.
So are you requesting me to
Yeah.
respond to?
Please. She's gone, but.
So on the North Albany traffic calming element, so I have been digging to get a better sense of where that was left off. We did have a discussion last year about the data. We did do some newer counts and presented that data to the commission. We sat down and reviewed that data with members from several of the neighborhood organizations. In that conversation, there was an interest expressed to continue with the direction that was previously given of doing the traffic circles and doing the full project. In reviewing where that was left off, my understanding is there was some engineering done. There was direction from this body to do revisions to the design, and that has not been done. So it's my job then to get new contracts, try to bring the old engineers back on, or figure out how we would complete what was directed previously to bring those revisions back to the commission. So that's where it left off. There was direction, but we have not done revisions to the design. I've had some thought of there were elements of it that could be done faster, whether it makes sense to do striping, to do red curbing in advance, since we are going to need to do engineering work before we could proceed with a capital project. So we could discuss that and bring that back to you as a potential change to your prior direction, or figure out if since it was part of the approved project, maybe we don't even need to, but that's where it's at the moment. I need to try to bring engineers back on board to complete the direction that was given and decide whether we should advance some elements of it that don't need additional engineering at this point.
Questions or comments?
Plenty to do here.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Maybe we can get Preston to come back in if there's no other questions or comments. And there he is. All right. 5.6 is a selection of chair and vice chair. I think we had a pretty good rotation of this position in the past. Because the position stayed relatively, or the members stayed relatively consistent, but now that we have some turnover, I don't know if anyone has nominations.
I nominate Commissioner Paulson to be chair.
I second the nomination.
If she'll accept the nomination.
If you accept the nomination. All right. Do we take a vote on this all together, or do we want to do the vice chair?
Do the chair first.
Okay, sounds good. So all those in favor of the motion for Commissioner Paulson to be chair?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, congratulations. I can finish out the item if you'd like. And we need to select a vice chair. Is there a nomination for a vice chair?
If nobody's interested, I'd be happy to serve.
Okay. Do we need a formal nomination of that, or can you nominate
I
yourself?
think you can nominate yourself.
Okay. So we have a second.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Seeing none. Congratulations. Thank you. All right. I can pass it over, or do I just keep going? I'll keep going.
You can play that.
I've seen him go like midway in the meetings and like, here you go. Just clean my hands.
Free, I'm free.
I'm not eager. All right, item 6 is announcements. Anything from staff?
No.
Commission?
The Bay Trail is taking longer than expected, which is not surprising, but it is remarkable in its current state, and is mostly walkable, and fabulous views.
Are you encouraging people to trespass? As a city official, you might want to refrain that from that.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that you can walk along it without going on it, and it is a marvelous access.
Great. Any other announcements? Okay. Item 7, future agenda items. So we can have commissioners' request items here.
So we had a written comment about the need for a signal to protect pedestrians who are crossing, sidewalk users who are crossing Marin east of Peralta. It's a fairly long distance from Peralta to Calusa. The active transportation plan actually calls for a signal. I can't remember if it's Tulare or exactly which street, but it calls for a signal to break that up. Obviously, that's...
Is it Ordway?
Is it Ordway? Yeah, I can't remember.
I think so.
Okay. Obviously, that's tremendously expensive. Could also have some negative consequences. But anyway, I think putting that item on the agenda, is there something that could be done there? Something could be gotten in the works would be useful, since we do have an active transportation plan and we do have a comment from the public on it.
Sure. Okay. Sounds good. Other items?
And I will, of course, ask for standards. And I have a new chair to appeal to now, so I will move on. You've heard that from me so many times now. And then it would be nice to have a running information item on the San Pablo Hawk signal adjustment.
Yes. That'd be good. Other items? Okay, seeing none. Next meeting is Thursday, February 27th. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for your service.
Thank you. It's fun to serve.
And we only need 4 minutes of our 15.